Got you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. Super excited to be here today. Today, we are going to be talking about Preact with some amazing folks from the Preact Core team and my co-host, Ben Lesh. So going ahead and introducing myself, my name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet. I am a Google developer expert, as well as co-founder of a company called This.Labs, and of course, a co-host for Modern Web. Ben, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Ben Lesh. I work on RxJS, and I also work as an engineer at Google on the Angular team. And I, in the past, have worked with React and Ember and AngularJS and several other things. So a little bit of experience. I haven't used too much Preact. I've played with it, but there's some similarities between React and Preact. So
yeah, a couple small similarities there.
Yeah, I stopped it that they rhyme. That was good enough for me.
Right. Yeah.
One's a spelling mistake. Okay, so introducing our next guest, Jason, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Jason Miller, _ develop it on Twitter until I pay somebody many thousands of dollars for a handle, maybe someday. I work at Google. I'm a web DevRel there. And I, in my spare time, work on Preact.
Nice, awesome. Well, we're super happy to have you here. And then introducing Zouhir as well.
Hi, I'm Zouhir. I'm an engineering PM at Microsoft Edge. I've been using Preact for a long time and recently joined as a core contributor. So yeah, excited to be here.
Yay, we're so excited to have you too. We have 3 Googlers and 1 Microsofter. And then Prateek.
Hey, I'm Prateek. I'm an engineer at the AMP HTML team at Google. And my spare time, I go back and contribute to Preact CLI and Preact.
Nice. Well, amazing. Obviously, you should be listening to this podcast if you care about Preact and all the exciting things happening here. Jason, I know we initially talked about, a few different exciting things that are happening in the Preact ecosystem. I don't know if you want to talk about React 16 API changes. Is this what's on top of everyone's mind so far?
Yeah, generally, it's what's on top of everyone else's mind. So I'll favor it. Like if GitHub issue thumbs up or any indication, this is something we owe some attention to.
Can I ask some obvious boring questions before we get into the cool stuff that you want to talk about? All right, so
totally.
For people out there that have heard of Preact but don't quite understand what it is, I think the general knowledge is it's a React alternative. Can you talk a little bit about why it's a React alternative or why it exists? Like if someone's like, hey, I've got React now, especially now that React doesn't have the crazy what's Preact about?
Network drop there, but I think I got it. Yeah, so this gets slightly harder as the 2 libraries age because their goals remain relatively constant, but the code bases and the trade-offs they make kind of change over time. So when Preact started out 3-something years ago, I think, it was essentially an attempt to boil the virtual DOM concept that React was pioneering down to whatever the smallest possible implementation was. So any trade-offs that could be made to get it tiny or performant would be made, whether that's readability or documentation or all these lovely things that end up mattering in the end. But that sort of ended up formulating a set of goals that guided the project once it actually gained critical mass, became a real thing. Preact kind of is a tiny implementation of the idea of React. So if you are a developer who is building something like an embeddable widget or there's a bunch of use cases, it was a small mobile application, or you are incredibly resource constrained, it's a lot easier to stomach or offset the cost of the virtual DOM algorithm at
Either
I-
I'm dropping or he is. I don't know.
Everyone's
I think
dropping.
he is
Yeah.
dropping.
I think Jason fully dropped. Oh no.
He looks handsome there anyway. Does anyone else want to pick up where he left off?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of pick up where he left off. So basically, what's where Jason stopped is like it's kind of smaller implementation, and but for the web, I don't believe that we offer any less than React. So even though it's much smaller, and there was some trade-off some trade-off has been made, but in the web, like it does like the same thing that React does. So the smaller size, in short, came from no like less abstraction. The renderer only for the web, there is like it wasn't engineered in mind where like we're gonna render native apps in mind, or it's gonna be like render VR in mind. So so I think the original like Preact thought was like make it work on the web, and let's not also rewrite the whole events. Get it like use the browser provided, like whatever the browser provided for us, and so if you use both React and Preact on the web, the only thing is Preact is much smaller and slower, and is smaller and more faster to execute as well. But yeah, that's kind of my kind of point of view about Preact, React, and the trade-offs.
Trade-off, the reason that it's smaller. Trade-off, the reason that it's smaller then is because Preact is engineered solely for the web, and it doesn't have this additional layer of abstraction to support native and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like native VR, wherever. Like I believe that well, Jason, the person who wrote the original, like the whole thing, and you know, and I think that was very good idea. Having that. I've been building like Preact application for the web for over 1.5 years, and it's been going awesomely solid.
Yeah, I've described the difference there as Preact being mercilessly against internal abstraction to the point where we don't even have objects in the code base because we don't want to pay for properties that we have to rename later. It's literally just like 16 functions that get concatenated into a file. It's probably a good example of how not to design a library if you want to keep your sanity as a maintainer. We are working on some things to address that, but that has been maybe the most common hurdle we've hit as a result of the way Preact is designed. It's difficult to onboard people to help maintain the project. I
see. Well, I think we could compare notes about how not to design a library. But you've designed this, you know, kind of relative to React, and I know that there's like a Preact compat library that you would use to kind of provide a layer of adaptation between the API differences of Preact and React. React comes out with new versions at a fairly good clip. Like how do you keep up with that? I mean, there's a whole team of people producing, you know, new things that you have to accommodate, right?
Yeah, and we're in an odd position because we ship one Preact compat, and the goal of Preact compat is that it's compatible with React, no version number specified, which is a little bit insane. So when React deprecates things or removes them, we can't. And that's something it's actually going to be changing because it, you know, originally when we were on React 0.13, 0.14, like the API wasn't changing that much. It was minor additions, not a ton of removal. But that has since kind of gone away. We are now looking at potentially React 17 doing some fairly major, visible changes from a developer's perspective. So our plan for this, and it's sort of started, but this is a monumentous goal, so there's some challenges here, is to create a modularized version of Preact compat. So this will essentially be like in the style of Lodash, etc., a whole bunch of bolt-on modules that either inject behavior into Preact itself or provide aggregate behavior into an object that, when composed, sort of looks like the React object. And one of the ways that we're looking at making this really easy for people to use is releasing a Babel plugin that actually, crawls through the AST of your code and figures out what pieces of React you're using and conditionally imports them. Because then they'll all get kind of deduped, and you'll end up with your Preact compat, whatever that happened to be, depending on the libraries you use. This actually came out of the exact opposite use case, which is people needing to pull in Preact compat to be able to use a React library that was using like one little feature that we don't ship in core, like string refs, for a long time was like the reason people used Preact compat. And like compat isn't free. It injects behavior into middleware hook points in Preact, which have a cost. So it was always painful for me to see like, oh, literally like the string refs code is probably 300 bytes. But you have to pull in all of compat just to get that. So this is going to be kind of our solution going forward for that, is to automate this away. It's almost like manual tree shaking or tree building. I don't know. Whatever the opposite of tree shaking is.
The opposite. That would
tree grafting.
Right. Growing trees.
Should we go back to the one question about the API changes?
Sure. Hopefully my network remains solid. So we have been kind of monitoring the React 16 stuff. Obviously their progress is pretty breakneck at this point. And every time React comes out with a feature, we kind of have a little bit of work to do on our end of things to figure out if that's something we want to put in Preact. Spiritually, Preact tends to mirror things that happen in React, but it's not one-to-one, right? We don't still have string refs support. We have ever so slightly different semantics for event bubbling because we only rely on the browser's event infrastructure. So there's these trade-offs we make that we try to make them as invisible as possible. We try to make trade-offs where the 99% case doesn't care. But every once in a while we hit something where React introduces a feature, everyone's going to be now using the feature, and unless we want everyone in the world to have to use Preact compat, we have to put it in core. So a couple really obvious ones here would be like the new create ref API is literally like I don't know how many bytes. It's like 40 characters of JavaScript in order to get it into Preact Core. So that's probably the kind of thing we can justify, although you'd be surprised how stringent our requirements get there. But that one's easy, and it's built on top of existing Preact and React infrastructure, so it's an easy change. The component did catch stuff that they've added in React 16 for error handling within a subtree. We've been toying with this for ages. I've done userland solutions for this in the past. I think we're now at the point where we've got a PR ready for Preact that merges kind of the best of breed functionality with stuff that we can manage to put into this tiny library. So that's going to be something that lands. And then similarly, there's some interesting API changes that React is making to try and avoid lifecycle method abuse. Main one would be get derived state from props, and its sister method, the name of which I cannot remember. But there are two PRs open right now with sort of alternative implementations of this for Preact, and we're still just at the point where we're figuring out which one we're going to merge. But once those are in, we're going to be we won't have parity with React 16 because of fragments, which are kind of like the big ugly elephant in the room and have been for 6 months. But in terms of the programming surface area, will be pretty good to React developers. The interesting thing here is I wouldn't call myself a React developer, and there's like a good 40 to 50%, we'll say 40 to 60%. It's around half, but we don't really know where it slides, of Preact users don't really use it for the React compatibility. And so these kinds of breaking changes that are prompted by React's API design can sometimes hurt us. because people, they know the component API from React 0.14 or whatever last time it got solidified, and it works for them. It works fine. They've built solutions on top of it, and they want the API to be stable. So we kind of have to resolve that with anything we do. Thankfully, React they're a huge library with a ton of users, so they're generally respectful of these things. But it does make us really wary of deprecations and removals in that regard. We don't want to alienate half of our user base.
Ben, I feel like this sounds like a lot like the RxJS compat stuff, and just stop making changes to the libraries.
Yeah, just stop working on it.
Yes, and you're muted, by the way.
That might be a good thing, actually.
Yeah, I need to unmute. I was just going to say it does sound very similar, with the exception that I only have to be compatible with myself. So it's,
I mean, if you were dating yourself and you only had to be compatible with yourself, life would be amazing, right?
That's true.
That's true.
You have a 91 compatibility score with RxJS.
Tinder would be really boring, though. It would just be like a
swipe right or swipe left, whatever it is. Just your face keeps coming up.
I can't seem to swipe left on myself. This is really weird.
So, one thing that got me really excited about trying to use Preact, and maybe this is something that will entice other people, was Preact CLI and all the amazing things that Preact CLI provides out of the box. And if I remember correctly, you can use Preact CLI with other libraries, or am I crazy?
You can always import other libraries to use with Preact CLI. You can import more Webpack plugins, more Webpack loaders. It's designed to be fully flexible, to accommodate more stuff that your entire ecosystem requires. So if there's a Webpack loader that you want for your CSS, or there's a plugin which you want to use, there are a bunch of service worker plugins that we maintain in the Preact CLI README repo. So if you want to generate service workers with that, so you can keep adding those stuff with the help of Preact config.js. Yeah, and so it's easy to bring in more libraries at most of the times, I would say.
Yeah, 99% of the time. There's that 99% case catering thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I like, that's one of my favorite things, that the Webpack configuration that Preact CLI has are totally overridable, extendable, and rewritable, and just go crazy. Yeah,
we spent like a good year iterating on what that configuration looked like, because for those not familiar, Preact CLI, it's a command line tool, but it's really kind of like an opinionated Webpack config. It's kind of our answer to boilerplates, like the other CLIs are answers to boilerplates. But we went a tiny little extra step of adding a way to then kind of take over that Webpack configuration before we hand it off to Webpack. And that ended up spawning a plugin ecosystem around Preact CLI, which is weird because it's like a plugin ecosystem, where you have like loaders. And it ends up getting a little bit meta, but the end result is, if you do a Google search for like Preact Service Worker, you'll get a Preact CLI plugin for Service Worker that's like one line of code drop in to change your Service Worker config. If you were asking earlier about support for other libraries like rendering Vue with Preact CLI, I think theoretically it's possible, but this gets into why Preact CLI is a little bit special beyond just being an opinionated set of defaults for Webpack. We do crazy stuff like analyze your source code for where your routes are and transform them into async split points, like route-based code splitting. Basically trying to take the virtual DOM model, which knows nothing about the purple pattern and all this kind of fancy stuff. It's just objects, and analyze it statically as much as possible to produce something semantic rather than just code that you have to run to figure out what it does. And that we're kind of helped out there by the declarative nature of the way React expresses views, but there's some special sauce there that if you were to use this to render Vue, you'd probably be missing. And also, shout out to Vue CLI. There are easily the Vue equivalent of Preact CLI and possibly much more.
Have you at all considered embracing like a typed variant of JavaScript, say Flow or TypeScript? TypeScript's probably more popular. In order to kind of take advantage of the static analysis you could do and try to make apps even smaller, considering it seems to be a very strong goal of Preact to reduce size.
Yeah, so we support TypeScript, I think either out of the box or via like an auto-detected plugin.
Yes, it's via plugin.
Via plugin, yeah. And I think right now we ship some defaults that should reduce code size, stuff like const enums and these sorts of nifty TypeScript tricks that result in faster and smaller output. But I don't know that we have like an opinionated default TypeScript config that aims to get you Preact level optimizations. And that might be for the simple reason that not everybody on our core team is on board with TypeScript.
Haven't you told them that everyone's doing it? Like all the cool kids are doing it?
No, because I am not even technically a full convert yet. I'm an ambiscript.
So when you say not everybody's bought in, you really mean you.
Well,
no. I'm avoiding finger pointing here. There's I think like 50-50 split.
He's more into TypeScript than me. I'm kind of. I was like, all right. I'm not supposed to. Yeah. Anyway.
Hold on. Here's my 15-second pitch for typed JavaScript. First, I'll say that I hated typed JavaScript, and as a library maintainer, I still find it to be a pain in the ass. However, whenever we updated RxJS 5 to RxJS 6, because of so many people were using TypeScript with RxJS, we were able to produce TS-lint rules that went through and found all the code that needs to be updated from version 5 API to version 6 APIs using typings, and automatically update them for people. So we did a large scale change inside of Google and Google 3 and changed thousands and thousands of files like in seconds. And everything just worked. So, and people have been able to do that around. So if I was going to have a small sales pitch about it, it would be if you try to get people on board with using TypeScript, then your upgrade path becomes a lot smoother. I mean, aside from all the other benefits of typed languages or whatever.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I can say as a library maintainer, maintaining typings is a pain. Like when you're on the consumer end, it's just like, oh, slap an any on it and it's fine, whatever.
I'm trying to think if RX would have this problem. For us, we literally maintain like a mirror of all the DOM typings, which is probably the worst thing you could ever self-inflict because they change constantly. It's literally an unversioned specification, but we're going to publish versions of it to NPM. So there's just like random Boolean properties that were invented last month that don't exist in our TypeScript definition because they physically can't yet because we haven't done a release since then. So we're always chasing that. I think
RxJS doesn't have problems like that. Our problems are more like, oh, we're doing functional programming wizardry that works great in JavaScript, but doesn't always adhere to what a typed language can do.
Yeah, and I think that might be part of the reservations of some of the guys we have on the core team. Especially since like the core team is kind of made up of a group of people who are like really hot on the small modules idea. And one of the things that TypeScript introduces is that indirection between the source you write and the source you produce. And for certain classes of code, it was a terrible pun, for certain classes of code, it's nearly one-to-one. So, you're safe to use const. It's not going to produce some crazy, runtime check. But in other cases, like classes, you really do have to know what the compiler is going to produce when you type your code. And I think that indirection can sometimes be a mental hurdle for people or a blocker. In the case of Preact, I don't know that I could have achieved the same level of manual, like code golfed hand minification that I have if I was using TypeScript, or at the very least, I would have to have become a TypeScript wizard.
maybe that's a good skill to have. I don't know.
We've got a few of those at Google. You would you're in the right spot if you do want to become one.
Put an N on it.
On the plus side, so you were talking about using TSLint fix for upgrade paths. We have done a little bit of that. We actually have a surprisingly strict ESLint config that we ship by default with Preact CLI, and it does fix when you run it. So it will catch things like unnecessary classful components. It will convert them into stateless functions, and those types of things. It will catch where you're using prop types because we don't use those. So it's mildly intelligent about those things. It also is maybe a little bit draconian about property ordering or a class method ordering, which is something we may or may not keep.
What do you mean draconian? Does it enforce like alphabetical ordering or something?
Not alphabetical. I would like to say that I've never in my life imposed that on anyone. I've been on the other side. But it does impose like your render method should be last because that's sort of the React convention. And honestly, I don't think there's really a good reason to do that. It's just, it was in the config that we picked. So,
are there any other new and exciting Preact CLI changes that we should be aware
of? We removed a bunch of stuff. Like when we shipped CLI at Google I/O, it literally did everything. It bundled an HTTP2 server with push support. And if you've ever tried to install certificates on a user's machine without them having to do anything manual, you will know that that's just not really possible. Try as we might. So we're walking that back a little bit. We've removed the Preact serve command, and instead our build command outputs server configuration in the Firebase superstatic format, because that was sort of the most popular one. So that can be consumed by Firebase hosting. It can be consumed by the superstatic server. I have a module that will pull that in and spit out Netlify rewrites and headers. It's just sort of a really basic JSON format that lets you transmogrify or whatever you want to call it into some end format. And our goal there is to independently release an HTTP2 server, like an HTTP2 static file server that does push and that reads in this format for headers and redirects and whatnot. Just because we think there's no real reason for that to be a part of Preact CLI. That is something independent that the community could benefit from that we don't need to sit on. And also it makes our installation easier.
Now that you're at Google, have you talked at all with the Angular CLI folks?
A little bit. I don't know if they bundle like a emulated production server in Angular CLI.
They do. They have they even do some SSL things, and I don't know everything that it does, but they do a lot of the same stuff.
That makes sense. They got bit with the same shared root CA bug that we did last year, so that would make sense.
Actually, it was exciting because at Google I/O, somehow found myself with Hans, who does Angular CLI, and then I can't remember his name right now, but anyways, the person who does Polymer CLI, and then Prateek, Preact CLI. So were there any great conversations that came out of that conversation, Prateek?
Oh, so we definitely exchanged a bunch of things that we could take from them. Is steal. And yeah, so the way they do modifications to their code while generating a boilerplate for the users is basically a virtual file system where they go and they make transformations is something that we can definitely use, because right now we have a system of templates where you can say that, hey, if you're a Preact CLI user and you want to start a project, then you can either start a project with material design or with maybe nothing in it, or maybe just a default setup. And they have something similar functionality. And the thing that we have been struggling with is like there are like ever-growing number of requests. So there's a request for material template, there's a request for Redux template, and there's something else coming up. So we could definitely use like an in-memory transformer, which can just plug in functionalities instead of just a hard-coded thing.
I feel like you're talking about Angular's schematics. Is that?
Yeah. So exactly. To name that, yes.
That's pretty cool. There's other things you can do with that too, where other libraries can provide schematics for when they update,
Exactly.
and just they're agnostic, and anything that's able to consume those schematics can then, import the proper node modules or update other things. It's pretty cool. So it's cool that you're looking into that. I recommend it.
Sure. And as far as we are on the smaller build things, there's a small thing that we are also experimenting is shipping module code from Preact CLI. So less transpilation, less of your bundle size, faster first contentful pane, faster pass times and everything. So we'll be experimenting with an ES6 flag that will not transpile your code till ES5 and ship it via a strip type module tag. So hopefully making everything a little bit more faster.
Definitely in development, that's going to be a pretty awesome win.
So, Zouhir, what do you get to focus on being a part of the Preact Core team? Like, does everybody have sort of different focuses on different things? Or?
Well, I mean, I don't think like everyone has a task or a focus because I mean we all like have full-time jobs and we all like do it on the side. So we all like discuss everything that we want to plan and what we want to decide to work on and stuff like that, all in like our Slack. And I mean, I've recently have been kind of away from Twitter, open source, and a lot of things, and slightly now coming back as I was relocating, let's say. But like sometimes, like I kind of every month or so, I deploy a Preact app, a PWA. I've been very excited, interested with CLI. So I think one of my last things I did with Preact CLI was like a game, PWA game. I've been looking at the, watching closely the next render that the team is working on. Haven't been able to contribute much, but it's pretty exciting. And like all exciting stuff. So
that was a coy drop.
Well, on what? Tell us what's happening.
So I have a note here that says, we can talk about next generation things, but not reveal the code name.
Yeah.
Because that's the most important part.
For now, can we call it codename Fancy Pants?
Sure, yeah totally.
Great.
My fancy async.
I'm glad I can help.
Careful now, it's gonna stick.
Oh god, if it sticks, I'm screwed. As you said this, I realized that my name badge from a conference I was at today was stuck to my pants. So this is highly relevant.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so yeah, so we have been prototyping an experimental next generation renderer for Preact. We have not been talking about this a lot in public. This is something that the relatively recently formed Preact steering committee has been working on, and a couple of other contributors that we've noticed lurking around the various repos and reached out to individually. The reason why this work is not public is we don't know whether this is the next direction that Preact is going to go in. In terms of a version timeline, this is not what will become Preact 9. Preact 9 will be based off of the code that everyone can see up on GitHub. But it is an experiment to change some of the most fundamental parts of how Preact works, like the diffing algorithm itself and how it's implemented and what its constraints are. And this sort of arose out of trying to figure out what on earth we were going to do to get fragments to work. Preact's architecture just can't do fragments, period. It's just not a thing that would ever happen. It has to have some sort of a semi-hierarchical relationship between virtual DOM trees, and fragments just completely toss that out the window. They're super neat and increasingly useful. We don't see a ton of usage of them in the wild, but they're definitely a useful concept. But for us right now, the barrier to getting them into Preact Core is impossibly high.
So just to explain, fragments you're talking about are sections of virtual DOM that are asynchronously loaded. Is that right?
No, not even asynchronously loaded. They're basically, it's like, how can I explain this? Okay, so let's say you had a component that, when rendered, returned multiple children as its virtual DOM representation. So so let's say render return an array of divs. So now you have a virtual component in your virtual DOM hierarchy that is concretely represented in the DOM as 3 divs. And so anytime any of those 3 divs changes, that they have to get mapped individually back to that component, and you may have many of those components, let's say, adjacent to each other in the virtual DOM structure. So all of your reordering has to take this one-to-many relationship into account. It just gets really hairy, and we've had some prototype PRs to make this work in Preact, but they tend to be centered around the idea of like, we're going to stick a span in and then like maybe delete it after or whatever, but we're going to like use a DOM element as a shim here. And I just don't think it's worth us bolting something onto the renderer just to get this feature if it's not done right. So like one of the big changes I can talk about with the next generation renderer is it is experimentally changing from diffing virtual DOM against DOM to changing to diffing virtual DOM against the previous virtual DOM tree, which is more like how React works. There's obviously performance benefits of doing that as well, but it actually just comes out of trying to make these fragments work and also trying to simplify our code base. It's very early stage, it's very experimental, but I can say it is much, much, much faster than Preact. It is API compatible with Preact, with the exception of added fragments. It has the potential and currently some implemented asynchronous rendering pipeline stuff. So if you have an async iterable of children that you pass to a component, those can be rendered out asynchronously. And the whole pipeline has been kind of adjusted to make that possible. Yeah, and it's also smaller. It's 30% smaller than Preact.
One of the last things I was looking at before I relocated from Australia to the States was fragments, and like as Jason said, it's like nearly impossible. So I was around March, I was like trying to make fragments happen in Preact, and I didn't even show like send a PR or anything because it's impossible. Like
yeah, we've had implementation attempts in Preact Core. We've had them attempts in Preact compat, because obviously the React.fragment is an API that we should probably be emulating there. But it's at the point where our best bet now is to do a renderer rewrite. And so this is that. It's currently happening in private. If we get to the point where we think it's a decent direction, whether or not the code is ready or not, we'll make it public. And honestly, even if we don't, we'll make it public. And it will just serve as like a, warning, don't go down this path or whatever. You'll waste 6 months of your life or someone's life.
I always love warnings. Like Ben has I think Ben has you have an experimental branch right now in RxJS, and it says, do not use this unless you are crazy. And, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but I read it and I thought it was hilarious. Like, what about real life CLI applications? Can we name off a few?
Yes. Like I have adapted like Preact at work since I think way over a year and a half, maybe like Well, I don't remember the month exactly, but over a year and a half. And we have. I used to work at Qantas Airlines in Sydney, and we have built all our like since you're a frequent flyer and like you have kind of widgets to display your status and credits and activity and etc. So we have kind of all that is powered by Preact CLI. So kind of all those little widget components, and I was like very, very proud of this work, and with the bundle sizes and you know the efficiency of like how easy it is to replace boilerplates with Preact CLI, and then get rid of all the boilerplates that gets outdated so quick and gets out of control so quick. Plus, I don't know. Maybe I have to mention the memory matching game I was working on, and kind of got popular on Twitter. And so this memory matching game I was working on, it's match3a's.games. In the first 2 days. In total, there is 5,000 users or players, and over 10,000 games has been played. Yeah, that's kind of two personal examples. There is also a lot of like other people using Preact. I'm not sure if they're using Preact CLI. They are on our website. So the website has a page of all the brands that are using Preact, Lyft, Uber, I don't know, like a bunch of others. I can't remember all the names. But if someone is listening and they use Preact, they should like send a PR with the logo, and we can put it on that page. It has like a lot of companies in there.
So if I use Preact, can I just send a PR with a picture of my face?
Yeah, you totally can.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if you use Preact to do like a web-based rendering of your face, then that would be super meta and cool.
Next project to Ben, Lesh. Next project.
Could be in VR. Like this could be a really interesting project. Yeah, we've seen funny use cases. So I know I kind of initially pitched Preact as being really good at doing things that are small, constrained environments, that kind of stuff. But people also just use it as a library, right? You know, there's always the comparison inevitably made. Oh, why would you choose Preact over React? Why would you choose React over Preact? At the end of the day, you're choosing a front-end rendering library, and you know we didn't put this same level of thought into whether you chose jQuery or Zepto. You just picked one, and if it was picking the one that you used for your last project because it worked well for you, that's great. So we do have a decent list of people and companies that kind of run the spectrum of the things you would expect, right? PWAs in countries where your internet speeds on mobile are terrible, so bytes matter. But then like Native Instruments, does I think it's like part of their website or maybe part of their backend stuff or whatever is done with Preact, and they're like a music company. So it's totally not like the low-end phone market or anything like that. And we have like a bunch of people who do embedding, like Algolia, I think in certain instantiations of their instance search, I think it is, use Preact just because it's like an embedded thing you stick on somebody else's site. So that's a decent use case. Yeah, there's a bunch of people. I initially added like a couple of people who I knew wouldn't complain to the like we are using page on the Preact site, and then we just sort of field the occasional PR there when somebody announces it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I've heard a lot of larger companies say they're using Preact, so it's it's not surprising, right? Yeah. Let's see. Oh my gosh, so many different topics to talk about. What about the Vue Polymer component compiler? Yeah,
so we have had this is something else that sort of falls into the bucket of experimental things. But this one has a lot of public interest. So when you had mentioned can Preact CLI, run other libraries, this is sort of a different take on that. This is what if you could import a Vue single file component, like a .vue file, in Preact or in Preact CLI, and it would run in Preact, like using Preact. So it's not like you'd be embedding Vue into Preact. It's like you're running view components using Preact. And it actually works by like analyzing the source of the template and the view component and its styles and all this kind of stuff, and transforming it into a virtual DOM component that works with Preact. But I have one for Vue and one for Polymer, and it's actually, you can actually mix and match the syntaxes from both, so you can end up with this like crazy unholy mess of like v-bind, but then also Polymer's loop syntax. It gets pretty wild. But one thing I ran into with this is there might be a case for templates, even for people who are really interested in JSX and virtual DOM and who prefer that paradigm, because templates are a very constrained programming environment, and they give you the opportunity to express intent rather than expressing, a syntax to accomplish a task. So you can do really interesting things when you statically analyze templates. If anybody's ever looked at the source for Svelte, you know what I mean. Like Svelte basically compiles your template into all of the underlying intentions that your template had, and there's no middleman there. It's just literally compiling your template into the things that you would have written by hand, but instead are using a template for. So this prototype compiler kind of tries to do that on top of Preact, so half runtime, half compiler.
That's interesting. That's what Angular Ivy is kind of aiming at as well. It's very, very similar.
Yeah, tiny runtime. I think you guys call it a VM. Glimmer is sort of working out of the same premise. Yours has had a ton more work put into it, so it's like you're looking at wire formats and like compactness and all this kind of stuff. This is much more of a prototype, but the model there of having this deterministic source to be able to start your compilation from is, super interesting to me. Even when you look at how easy it is to implement scoped CSS, like Shadow DOM style scoped CSS in a component that you're compiling, it's trivial. Like it's literally not a non-task. You know all the class names and you know all of the usages of the class names, and there's just no other context that you need than that. So I'm still really pumped for this. I have not released it because I don't know what I want it to be, and I don't want to throw a compiler at the community and have people think that I'm starting up this ecosystem when in reality it was just like me thinking, could we do this thing, right? This is just like a little moonshot project. But it is something that's sitting there. Maybe, someday we'll see a Preact CLI plugin that lets you render view components using Preact. That would make me very happy, because it would mean, next week, whenever I get some spare time after I release my current crop of backlogged open source projects, that'd be really neat. And I think it would be in our best interest, if we want to be good open source citizens, if we're going to release a compiler for view components to Preact, we should also release a compiler for Preact components to be able to run inside of Vue. I would love to see us start to break down those walls, especially because people don't consider Preact and Vue to be kind of as close as React and Preact.
Compatible.
But in a lot of respects, they're freakishly similar. And I don't mean necessarily in terms of the implementation. Evan has a level of wizardry that I can only hope to ascribe to. But in terms of their spirit, right, trying to do as much using as little as possible and accomplish the 99% extremely well, they're kind of tracking the same goals. So I could see us trying to bridge some of the gaps there between those two communities so that people don't have to make a choice. I hate the idea that somebody has to pick Preact or pick Vue when they're starting a project. You should just be able to start your project. You shouldn't have to decide that up front. I'm way too lazy to make those kinds of decisions at this point in my career.
Well, I definitely wouldn't doubt that this would be released next week, along with Preact Fancy Pants.
Right. Preact Fancy Pants is pretty good.
Yeah, I remember yesterday, Addie was like, Jason, why'd you released the Hedgehog themed Webpack plugin and the pre-render loader at the same time. So I'm waiting.
I just have so many libraries going out that I have to now bump them together. I had an hour and I had 2 libraries released. I actually had a bug open because I had the description for one of the plugins in the other plugin. I was like, all right, well, I've showed my hand. I copied and pasted the package JSON.
All right. So I have an additional question, and this is probably this is going to be a question that maybe makes Jason uncomfortable. But let's just say, and I'm going to start with a hypothetical here. Jason gets to work. Paul Irish comes and he's gone mad, and he beheads Jason with a katana. The problem I see is that Preact is under Jason's name on GitHub. There's no org for Preact. Have you considered putting it in an org?
Are you reading my weekly summary report? You other Googler. I have had a task list item to move Preact into the Preact.js GitHub org, which we have for a month. And if I get my wits about me at some point, I'm going to do that. We want to put the CLI there too. There's a community. There's no real reason to have these things under my name. So, and to that end, like we set up a steering committee and a core group of contributors that is kind of constantly being added to. And I want to make sure that everybody who's in that group feels like they're entitled to merge the PRs and to, put time into the project. And if they put time into the project, get rewarded in whatever ways. Like we have an open collective set up for that sort of thing. And one of the most important things there is making the visibility of the project's branding, not my branding. If I have a branding, I hope I don't have branding.
Yeah, I also have Jason's GitHub password in case of such an accident. But I'm only allowed to use it after the accident, not before.
Was this a James Powell moment where I typed?
I think it's written on the wall right behind him. This is live? So
it's so funny that you
that would
bring
be
up
interesting
the
that it's written on the wall of a hotel.
Oh yeah, were you about to mention the time James Kyle typed his GitHub password on stage?
I still have that password.
That's hilarious. That was
right
like 2 years ago.
Yeah, I was literally backstage watching him do that.
And the second time when it happens, no, this is still a dial. Oh god, it's happening. I've relived that in my head many times. Every time I go to delete a project on GitHub and it makes you type in the name, sometimes I, honorarily type my password in there and then delete it.
So I have another actually really important question is, to be on the Preact Core team, do you need to have a Twitter name with an underscore for it?
Do we all have one?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. We just need money to get proper.
You guys could add Jay Phelps then. He's got an underscore.
Yeah, Jay Phelps, Preact Core team.
I can get mine without the underscore. It's just taken and I can't get it without underscore.
You know what? I think we're a bunch of people who were late to the Twitter game. I think that's what it is. If you want to be a Preact Core team member, delete your Twitter and recreate it. But after somebody's hopped on your handle.
I wonder if there's an underscore Ben Lesh we can get to join the Preact team.
A Dunderlesh.
Just the Dunderlesh. We'll just reach out to him.
Or we're all very private, so we've put underscore prefixes in our names. Not that like you can't access us, but we're just putting it out there that we're private. This is a Python method nomenclature joke. Feel free to DM me.
I just checked. There's no Dunderlesh. Sadly.
You gotta make it. Actually, just go with Dunderlesh spelled out. We'll find something to put there. HorseJS 2.0.
Well, this is really fun to talk. We have so many other things. You guys always have really interesting things going on in the Preact ecosystem. We'd love to have you at the next this.javascript, of course. Special thanks to Zouhir, who's the one who actually reached out and got me excited about, hey, we should probably be doing a Preact podcast. So thank you so much, Zouhir, for doing that.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely. So you can follow Jason at _developit on Twitter, Zouhir at _Zouhir, or Prateek at _PrateekBH. So stay tuned for, the Lady Leet _, but you can follow me at Lady Leet or at Ben Lesh, and we will be having the underscores following so we can all join the Preact Core team because I'm excited. And again, thank you everybody for listening to this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. Very happy to again talk about Preact, and please follow up and let us know if you have any questions. And thank you so much.